Imagine a weapon that is impossible to extinguish, a liquid fire that clings to ships and people, that burns even on the surface of the water, turning the sea into a blazing inferno. A weapon whose recipe was one of the most closely guarded state secrets in history. A secret that struck terror into the hearts of enemies and secured the dominance of one empire for nearly 1,000 years. Now, imagine that this recipe was lost forever. It simply vanished from the pages of history, leaving behind only legends, speculation, and scholarly debates that continue to this day, with no one able to unravel its mystery. This isn't science fiction. This is the true story of the most enigmatic and deadly weapon of the ancient world. Greek fire. It was the superweapon of the Byzantine Empire, its ultimate trump card, its nuclear bomb of the Middle Ages. With it, the Byzantines incinerated entire fleets, sent armies that vastly outnumbered them fleeing in terror, and defended the walls of their great city Constantinople from countless sieges. What was this hellish mixture? How did it work? And how could humanity lose a technology that was centuries ahead of its time? Before we continue, we'd like to ask for a small favor. A like and a subscription would be the best way to show your appreciation. Thank you. Now, prepare yourselves as we delve into the world of alchemy and fire to try and solve the greatest military secret in history. To understand why Greek fire was so important, we need to look at the world of the 7th century. The Byzantine Empire, the heir to the great Roman Empire, was facing difficult times. It had been weakened by years of war with Persia, and at that very moment, a new, unstoppable force emerged from the south. From the Arabian deserts, the Arab countries, united under the banner of Islam, Arab armies swept like an avalanche across the Middle East and North Africa, conquering one Byzantine province after another. By the 670s, they were at the gates of the capital itself, Constantinople. The fall of the city seemed inevitable. The Arabs possessed a massive fleet, an army. The Byzantines were in despair, and it was at this critical moment in history that a mysterious figure appeared on the scene. A Greek architect and alchemist named a refugee from Arab. According to Byzantine chronicles, it was he who brought Emperor Constantine IV the recipe for a new, unprecedented weapon, a weapon that would save the empire. In 674, a gigantic Arab fleet entered the Sea of Marmora and began the siege of Constantinople. The Byzantine fleet, consisting of small and maneuverable ships called dromons, sailed out to meet them. The Arabs, confident in their numerical superiority, prepared for an easy victory. But what happened next plunged them into a state of shock and superstitious terror. From the bows of the Byzantine ships, torrents of roaring, hissing flame erupted onto the Arab vessels. But this was no ordinary fire. It stuck to the wooden hulls and could not be doused with water. In fact, contact with water seemed to make it burn even more fiercely. It blazed on the surface of the sea, surrounding the Arab ships in a ring of fire. Panic swept through the fleet. Sailors, engulfed in flames, leaped desperately into the water, only to find the fire pursuing them there as well. The Arab fleet was incinerated and put to flight. This was not just a victory, it was a miracle wrought by Greek fire. So, what was this hellish concoction? The exact recipe, as we've mentioned, is lost. The Byzantines guarded it jealously. The secret of its production was known only to a very small circle of people and was passed down from emperor to emperor. Divulging this secret was punishable by death. But from various historical sources, we can piece together a rough idea of its composition and method of use. Most likely it was a viscous or sticky liquid based on crude petroleum or asphalt. Petroleum was known at the time in Mesopotamia and the Middle East, and the Byzantines would have had access to it. Other components were likely added to the petroleum. For example, sulfur, which releases a suffocating gas when burned, or pine resin, which would make the mixture thicker and stickier. But the main secret ingredient, the one that made Greek fire so unique, was probably quicklime. When it comes into contact with water, quicklime undergoes a violent exothermic reaction, meaning it releases an enormous amount of heat. This could explain why Greek fire wasn't extinguished by water but instead flared up. Another theory suggests that the mixture could have contained saltpeter or other substances that release oxygen when heated, sustaining combustion even underwater. It was possibly a complex, multi-component mixture whose recipe varied over time, but the composition itself was only half the secret. The other, equally important part was the delivery system. The Byzantines developed a special device called a siphon. This was a bronze tube mounted on the bow of a ship. Inside the ship were boilers where the mixture was heated and pumps that created pressure. The siphon operator, the siphonarios, would aim the tube at an enemy ship, and on his command, the superheated, burning liquid would shoot out of the nozzle under pressure, engulfing the target. The sound that the siphon made was described as a lion's roar or a clap of thunder. The very sight of this fire-breathing device struck terror into the enemy. Greek fire became the primary weapon of the Byzantine navy. For centuries, it saved the empire time and again. In 717, during the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople, it once again burned the enemy fleet. In the 10th century, when new enemies, the Rus, who came in their longboats from the northern lands, descended upon Byzantium, their fleet was also destroyed by Greek fire at the walls of the capital. Princess Olga, who later visited Constantinople, was said to be so impressed by this weapon that it became one of the reasons why the Rus ultimately adopted Christianity from Byzantium. Greek fire wasn't only used at sea. There were also handheld, portable versions of the siphons, used by defenders on fortress walls. They also created clay grenades filled with the flammable mixture, which they hurled at the enemy. This weapon was an absolute game-changer for its time. It gave the Byzantines a technological advantage that no one could replicate for centuries. Byzantium's enemies tried to uncover the secret. The Arabs created their own incendiary mixtures, but they were merely pale imitations. The Crusaders, who encountered Greek fire during their campaigns, described it with reverent horror. They called it flying fire and prayed that it would not strike their ships. But why was this secret lost? There are several theories. The first and simplest is that the secret was so well guarded that at some point, there was simply no one left who knew it. Perhaps the family or guild of artisans who held the recipe perished during one of the many civil upheavals or epidemics, taking the secret to their graves. The second theory is linked to the decline of the Byzantine Empire itself. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the empire was no longer the mighty power it once was. It was losing territory, and its economy was in decline. It is possible it simply no longer had the resources to produce the complex and expensive components of Greek fire. Access to petroleum in the Middle East was lost, and trade routes were disrupted. The production of the sophisticated bronze siphons and pumps also required a high level of metallurgy, which may have been lost. As the empire grew poorer, so did its technology. And finally, the third theory, which is perhaps the most important, the emergence of a new, simpler, and more effective weapon. Gunpowder, invented in China, reached Europe and the Middle East. Just as Greek fire was beginning to fall out of use, gunpowder was easier to produce. Its recipe was no secret, and cannons and arquebuses proved to be far more effective weapons than the cumbersome and dangerous two-handle siphons. Greek fire was a close-quarters weapon, with an effective range of no more than a few dozen meters. A cannon, however, could hurl a projectile hundreds of meters. Gradually, gunpowder artillery simply displaced the old incendiary weapon. Why risk having a cauldron of boiling oil on board when you could just fire a cannon? The secret of Greek fire became obsolete, and over time, it was simply forgotten. The last reliable mention of Greek fire being used dates to the siege of Constantinople in 1453, when the Ottoman Turks finally captured the city. But even then, according to eyewitnesses, it was no longer the powerful fire of old, but rather a pathetic imitation. With the fall of Byzantium, the secret was lost for good. Today, scientists and historians continue to debate its composition. Experiments are conducted, and attempts are made to recreate the recipe. Some enthusiasts have achieved a degree of success, creating mixtures that burn on water, but no one can say with certainty that they have managed to perfectly replicate the legendary Greek fire. Modern analysis suggests the most likely composition was a mixture of light petroleum distillates thickened with resin, with added sulfur salt, which releases a self-igniting gas, phosphine, upon contact with water. But this is all still speculation. The secret the Byzantines kept for nearly 1,000 years remains unsolved. The story of Greek fire is more than just a tale of an ancient weapon. It is a cautionary tale about how technology can shape the destiny of entire civilizations. For Byzantium, Greek fire was what nuclear weapons are to the modern world: an absolute deterrent, a guarantee of sovereignty. As long as they had this secret, their capital was impregnable. Once the secret was lost or became irrelevant to empire fell, it is also a story about the fragility of knowledge. We tend to think that progress is irreversible, that knowledge only accumulates, but the story of Greek fire shows that this is not the case. An entire technological field, centuries ahead of its time, can simply disappear, dissolving into history if it ceases to be valued and maintained. And today, as we look at modern flamethrowers, napalm, or phosphorus munitions, it is worth remembering their distant, mysterious, and far more enigmatic ancestor, a weapon born of roars and flames that saved and destroyed empires, and whose secret was carried away forever by the ancient and wise bot. Your support, through a like and a subscription, is very important to us. And do not forget to hit the notification bell, so you'll always stay up to date and never miss our new videos.